being joined in the program by Director, Commonwealth Institute and Chairman, June 12 Movement, Professor Anthony Kila, who is going to be helping us break down this particular broadcast by President Bola Tinubu. Thank you so much, Prof, for coming on the program.
Good to be here. Good morning, everybody.
Good morning. Perhaps the natural place to start, your impression of the President's speech.
Well, I think it was a good speech. Overall, I think it was a good speech. At least it was my kind of speech, because those who follow my writing and my opinion on speeches, I've advocated for over 12 years in this country that, especially in the last 4-8 years, that there should be a distinction between the speech of May 29th, which is an accountability of governance from the day you're sworn in, and June 12th, which is a celebration and recognition of Democracy Day. And the president talked about his moral and constitutional duty as a direct beneficiary. Let me absolve my own moral and historical duty, given that I'm a very known critic of the Buhari administration, to appreciate the past President Buhari, under whose watch this day became recognized as Democracy Day. I say this because if you ask me what Buhari has achieved, I'll say this is the only thing he achieved. Every other thing pales, every other thing he touched went awry. So recognizing this day, especially because before him, others had the opportunity of doing it and they didn't do so, and it happened under him, I think we should recognize that administration for that. In terms of today's speech, I think it was a good speech because I've always argued that on this day, we should talk about democracy, not about governance, not about my administration. And I think the president fulfilled that well. He almost became like a priest or, a moralist or a theorist of democracy. That's a good thing. The problem with him is that it's not enough for him to talk. He will be judged on his action as well. And so far, not so good. Let's be frank with ourselves. That's a problem, though. But in terms of the speech, which is your question, Geoffrey, how was the speech? Mm-hmm. The speech was good. My impression was that it was well crafted. It understood text and context of democracy. And when he inserted himself saying, I'm a direct beneficiary of that, therefore, I understand the onus on me to perform very well, and I promise to do so. The problem we have is that the fruit of his labor have not yielded results yet for most Nigerians, if we want to be objective, where at the moment now, he says, the way we've been doing it has been wrong. And he used a good expression. It's not my expression, but, it's the kind of expression people like him use, the social democratic kind of people. He talked about economic democracy. We must admit that under him, we're not doing well on that one. That must be very clear. We shouldn't dance around it if we have a conscience. So far, so bad on that. But he says, we are rebuilding, we're reforming. So at the moment, in terms of the economic democracy, we're in a situation where some viewers will know that at home or when you go to a restaurant, when they tell you, just hang on a second, we're cooking the food. It's going to come and it's going to be great. So far, we're hungry. The food is not there yet, but he says, wait, it will come. That's where we are. That's the one paragraph inserted of his administration. The rest was the greatness of democracy. I also like, as you've mentioned, the fact that he actually listed, the heroes, the gladiators who stood for this democracy. Mm-hmm. And it's a good list. Not complete, because but it can't be complete. He was going to list everybody. That would be the speech would just be, here's the list. But he listed some very crucial people. I think in a very Nigerian way, federal character, cross-party, cross-region, he tried to pick on everybody. So I think it was a well-crafted speech. Some people sat down and thought about people like me who will come and look for what is wrong with it. And it ticked all the boxes. So to that extent, it was good. He talked about, strangely, he also recognized the media, so you guys should be happy, he recognized your batch with their names, some newspapers. He left out Labour. I think that wasn't good, because he mentioned some individual leaders in Labour, Franco Correa, my mentor, some other people. The late Franco Correa, they still sound alive in my mind, and those are people who groomed people like us. But he left out Labour, which played a crucial role. That institution, that is a strange thing. But overall, I'm not a very generous marker, but I will rate this high, generally speaking, yes.
Yes, indeed, Prof. And your point about the need to talk about democracy,
Yes.
you know, as an ideal is quite appreciated, and not necessarily about governance,
Yes.
you know, but really democracy is a form of governance.
Yes.
And so perhaps it's also important to reflect on where we are as well. And for me, it's particularly instructive because, as I said earlier, one of the high points is that the president himself was one of the heroes of democracy, and he acknowledged it by saying that he is morally and constitutionally bound, you know, to also sort of midwife the developmental process, which is where I want us to reflect on. Are there any signs that there is clarity of purpose and the approaches to taking Nigeria out of this economic woes that we currently find ourselves in? Because if indeed the president is one of the heroes of democracy, then Nigeria should consider itself lucky to have him as a president at this point in time. But are there any signs that indeed the administration wholly has a clear understanding of how to take us out of where we are to where we want to be?
Well, the problem with governance is that you don't judge it on intention, you judge it on fact. Until we see the fact, we can't say it's good. You know, you might have very good intentions, and this government is high on intentions, but until you actually bring the food to the table, nobody can say how good you are, a chef or cook. That's the problem we have with that. So, you know, as he says, wait. We just have to wait. The other side of it is that whilst waiting, what we can't do, though, is demand. We can demand, for example, that the government stop being wasteful, you know. So a government that says, wait, we're working for you, should not be sending 19 billion on Hajj. A government that says, wait, we're working for you, should not be splashing money on new cars for legislators, as if they came to Abuja without cars. You know, they did have cars. Perhaps the government who says, wait, we're working for you, should not be renovating houses with billions, not as if the roofs were leaking. Those are the kind of contradictions you get. It might sound populist because overall, those amounts will not change the economy. I say it's an economist. You know, it's not that if you don't buy cars, all of a sudden the Nigerian economy will be better. No, it's just as it sends a wrong signal. And as somebody who, perhaps not hero, let's, you know, as one of the soldiers of democracy, who the president is, those things should be understood, that it is important to send the right signals in democracy as well.
Well, let's shift gears for a moment and bring in Senior Advocate of Nigeria, Mr. Adegboruwa, who is in our Abuja studio, joins us also for this Democracy Day special. Good morning, Senior Advocate. Welcome to the Morning Brief.
Good morning. Thank you.
Well, I could talk about your June 12 experience as well, even though the president didn't mention your name or that of Professor Kila. But that doesn't take away the fact that you played your role as well. I was just reading something about your journey from Area F Ikeja to DMI Apapa. So clearly you have your own attachment to this celebration in court. But I remember also about 2-3 years ago, you had asked that, you know, people boycott government events. You said that even that president then, former President Buhari, didn't have any reason to celebrate Democracy Day and the rest. But now there's a new administration, the Tinubu government, giving this Democracy Day speech. From that journey, what you experienced up until now, does it match up for you, the speech you heard today?
Thank you very much, Kaude. Good morning, fellow Nigerians. Good morning, Professor Kila, my dear comrade. I listened to the speech of the president. Unfortunately, I'm unable to agree that anything has changed. It is true that the president, along with us and many other Nigerians, campaigned for democracy. You would ask me, what were we fighting for? The June 12th election was annulled by the military, and we were advocating for that election to be recognized. And then along with it was also to ensure that we enjoyed true federalism, and that subsequent elections will probably be better than the one we had in 1993. And I'm sure you know clearly that the election that brought the current president into office was nothing to write home about. and elections that I've held since he assumed office have gotten worse. So you ask me to say that, can we still describe ourselves as heroes of democracy? You know, especially if you have one of us who is now in power. Of course, I would say no. I expected on a day like this, all Nigerians who are being held in custody wrongfully should be released. I expected on a day like this, if indeed we say it's a day to commemorate democracy in Nigeria, we should talk about engaging the constituent units of this nation to find out whether indeed we are running a true federation. What are people agitating for? Why is there continual issues of banditry? Why is IPOB agitating? Why is there crisis in the Southwest? I thought that occasions like this will give us a roadmap of steps to be taken to achieve true democracy. What are we doing to amend the Constitution? When are we going to really start the journey of true federation, restructuring? When are we going to get to a stage when the judiciary will become the bastion of our democratic experience? So I'm sorry, I'm not impressed in any way at all by the speech of the president, in the sense that it is just rehashing history. Any historian who has read the contributions of Democrats, of comrades, of activists, will read any speech like this. But for somebody who was in the forefront of that struggle, somebody who himself was part of that particular struggle and is now the person in charge of the affairs of the country, I expected more, honestly. And so for me, looking at the past 1 year, and indeed our collective history from the period when we started agitating for democracy, it's gotten worse. Nothing has changed at all. As we speak here this morning, you are well aware that there are journalists who are kept in various detention centers because they criticize their governors, because they wrote something concerning a public officer, he was not happy about it, and then they are languishing in custody. That shouldn't be. I commend the president for asking Nigerians to hold him accountable morally and constitutionally for democracy, but it's just a matter of speech. You know what is going on in this country, the way the law enforcement agencies are still harassing Nigerians, the way the police stations have still continually become detention centers without regard to constitutional provisions about bail and freedom. So I expected an organic program that will define a movement forward. It's not enough for the president to say that we didn't arrest labor leaders when they declared their strike. What is the outcome of that strike? You know, a day like this should have contained a declaration to say we're paying 100,000, we're paying 200,000. But the president cleverly parried it and said we're going to send a bill to the National Assembly. So I expected something different, you know, from somebody who indeed was part of the struggle for democracy. So if you ask me my impression concerning this speech, it's just history. It's not different from what any columnist will write concerning the history of Nigeria. Thank you.
So if we bring it back to the studio, I'm sure you have a reaction to what the senior advocate has said. Perhaps it looks like what they say in law, beyond obiter dictum to enforceable decisions. Yeah. Do you agree that that should be, because you seem to say highlighting some of these things that are critical, but got into the nitty-gritty, you don't. I'm not sure how you want to characterize us, but maybe replying what he said.
Well, I think, you know, typical of Adegboruwa, he has a vision of the world. He's very clear on what things ought to be. He's not a theorist, you know, at least not just a theorist, because he's a theorist as well. He explains on this day, for example, what Ebon says is that the president, you say, because I'm a Democrat, I will start making sure that police do not brutalize Nigerians again. He says, moving forward. I think the president stopped at the moving forward to say our past is great, but the test of democracy is what we do going forward today. But yes, everyone's right. He did not then give concrete actions of what that moving forward will be like. I stopped before he came in saying that the true test for democracy for me is what the rest of us do, that we need to keep demanding. And I think now we're leading that demand to say, actually, our idea of democracy, what we fought for then, was an election that was free and fair, that was annulled, an idea of Nigeria that is truly federal, that is truly free from brutalization of police, because many of us were brutalized, brutalization of police, that is free from unfair election, that is free of imposition of people, that is based on merit. I think that is the way forward now, where the press is free. He's very right. The League of Columnists, to whom I belong and act as Secretary General, released a statement just yesterday, the day before yesterday, condemning the spate of arrest of journalists in the country. Some people even use the word expression. So in a democratic country, as history and chronicles of the world tells us, it is a rare thing for a journalist to be arrested in a truly democratic country. You know, it rarely happens. If somebody publishes something false, which is a crime, is bad, the courts are there, you know, fines are there. Those are civil things. You don't abduct people because they insult you or because they disagree with you. That's out of the world. But I think the kind of democracy we've constructed in 25 years is very far from what we imagined 31 years ago. Let's be factual about that. When we were moving for that democracy, we didn't imagine governor emperors. We didn't imagine where in one stage there will be factions pro-present governor, pro-past governor. That was not the idea. We didn't imagine expressions like Godfather. That's not that. So we need to be realistic about that. So what we now need to do, besides the fact that those who are old enough to know democracy, that fought for that democracy, in their mind had a parliamentary system in their mind. That's the kind of democracy we knew. So moving forward, what we need to do is to say those things that we wanted. Federalism, a people's constitution, is something still missing. But personally, I don't have a lot of hope in those in power. I have hope in the civil society that will keep pushing to say, let's have a people's constitution, let's go for a true federal Nigeria, let us make sure legislators legislate instead of doling out bags of food. That is not their duty. Let them go. This is a part that I'm very keen on. The other arms of government, let legislators remember that their duty is to stand up for their constituency, so that regardless of our party, the legislator from Lagos should be different in view and in voting from the legislator from Zamfara. And I say this because I'm from Lagos and I have cousins in Zamfara. But it doesn't matter if we're family members, but actually to say that these things do not tally with what we want. That's kind of legislative. And unfortunately, I underline unfortunately, we also have to call the judiciary into account in this democracy. A country where a court will issue an order against another order is not a democratic country. We need to start judiciary to play their part in this march towards a more perfect democracy, as it were.
And perhaps that would be, the ideal place to, continue the conversation from, particularly because of the commentary surrounding the judiciary at the moment. And the senior advocate had said that, the expectations are high that in this democracy, it is expected that the judiciary will be the bastion of democracy. And I'm coming to you, senior advocate, to take up on this, particularly because you also work within the precincts of that arm of government, with so many criticisms about conflicting court orders and about judges not particularly being incorruptible, as the case may be. Is the judiciary playing its role by being above board to be that arm of democracy that will stand true for the ideals from its own corridor?
I have no doubt that the judiciary is still the gateway to democracy. And indeed, we must commend the courts and our judges for the role they played in the history of our democratic experience. If you use the life of the president himself, you will see that he said he's a beneficiary of democracy, and that's from the point of view of the judiciary, whether from his own personal life, when he was charged to court, to the CCB, or as governor of Lagos State when he filed several cases to challenge certain policies of the federal government. The judiciary has been the bulwark of democratic progress. So I must commend the judges. There are exceptional and rare cases of some unexpected behavior, but they are few and far between. Maybe because these events have come to national life, they seem to dim the general performance of the courts. The problem with judiciary is not about capacity. We have judges who know the law and are daily delivering decisions based on their conscience, based on the facts and the state of the law. The area where we address judiciary in relation to democracy and the speech of the president is funding, infrastructure. Okay, if you look at the history of the president as the governor of Lagos State, you know what he did for the judiciary in terms of electronic recording, appointment of more judicial officers, improving the welfare of judicial officers, and then building more courts. That is our expectation from the president, that now that you are in charge of the federation, let's elevate the judiciary to its rightful place. Build more courts, appoint more judges, improve their welfare, both of judicial officers and judicial staff. I mean, it's the third arm of government. So you compare the judiciary with the president and ministers, you compare judges with the Senate president and senators, and then you can see the difference in terms of how the executive are continually starved the judiciary of funding and infrastructure compared to the other arms of government. And I'm saying this because I know that every executive in power will do everything to stagnate judiciary. Because a functional judiciary is an active check on the excesses of government and the impunity of government officers. I mean, you look at the United States, a former president was convicted. And just yesterday or so, the son of a sitting president was also convicted. That's judiciary. When people have the capacity to take decisions without looking back, when high court judges can take decisions and they don't fear that there will be a backlash from governors, or that they will be arrested, or that the EFCC will be making allegations against them or be threatening, as it were in the days past. So, and I'm sorry I say this because I'm rating the president from the point of view of his own history.
Right.
If we have a military in government today, I will not be saying what I'm saying. I'm looking at the president as one of us. When we started this struggle together to say we want Nigeria to be free, we want true democracy. So if I'm in power today, I don't need anybody to pressurize me. I expected the president to be turning out executive bills every day on how to improve the judiciary, to build more courts, to appoint more judges, and then give sufficient capacity for judicial officers to be able to perform. And that's when you can get to the stage when, even as governor of Lagos State, he was able to challenge the federal government successfully concerning issues of local government creation, concerning issues of physical planning.
Right.
We don't have that currently. It's getting worse.
Well, it's interesting because we had a review of this administration on judiciary, and it looked like a lot of, at least the people we had on board, scored him high, particularly with appointment of judges and the rest. But you have pointed out some holes in that one, so it's important to take that on board. But I'd like to bring it back to some of the points that the president made in his speech. And I counted at least 4 times that appeared as though the president was maybe remarketing or reselling democracy to Nigerians, as though democracy was under an existential threat of sorts. He made statements like, "From this change we shall never turn.
We made the right choice then. We must continue with that choice. He said that preservation of democracy is something that he wants, pledges to do whatever necessary to cement democracy as our way of life. He said that let us bond or board this progressive train together. He kept making statements as though people were beginning to lose faith in democracy, and maybe that's a message that he gets from time to time. And I'll tie this to the point he made that what we're meant to have is leaders being servants of the common good, and not what we see now, that leaders are the ones living large at the expense of the common good. So I'll come to Professor Kila and then come back to Senior Advocate of Nigeria. And I'd like you to speak to this, Professor Kila. Just how much of a threat is democracy under? Because it sounds like the president was aware or is aware of that threat as well.
Well, I think two things. Number one is that your observation is very right. There's no other way to do it. The president was really remarketing, reselling democracy to us, like to remind us, well, a bit, like clerics or pastors do every Sunday and remind you that Christ loves you. I always wonder, if I'm in church, why are you telling me that again? I'm here already. But sometimes I guess you need to do it the same way why the president is doing it, because one of the reasons why people abandon, I say people, not leaders, abandon democracy and embrace dictatorial is bad governance. And the key indicator of bad governance is economic issues. The second one is legitimacy of government. The third one is perceived prosperity. The idea that, look, what are we with this one for? If you have a system that is slow in the name of democracy, and that is why he said no matter how complicated it looks, he gets it. If you have a system that is slow, you just imagine somebody in khaki can do a decree and get things done. Attraction from dictatorship, whether it's military, whether it's fascism, tend to come up. The president is conscious of that. That is why he's selling it to us. Once you know that, this is my message to the president, once you know that, the duty, everybody has a duty in democracy. The duty of the media is to report and hold people account. That of the legislator is to legislate and check executive. The duty of the executive is to ensure good governance. The Nigerian parlance, good governance is called dividends of democracy. Is to ensure that that is happening. Where that is not happening, of course people are going to get, not fatigue of democracy, which exists as well, by the way, because in some countries, the allure of a strong man comes from fatigue of democracy. But in underdeveloping countries, it comes from the fact that when people cannot see the benefit, now let's go historical. Unless we want to fool ourselves, people should admit that in this country, in the past 25 years, those who have grown exponentially in wealth, in fame and fortune, have been those who went to political office.
But are they aware they're a major threat, existential threat to democracy themselves?
Well, the people like Tinubu will be aware. People who follow news, people who read will know. If you just take somebody who was a nobody and throw him into parliament or give him a ministerial role, those ones might not know. But those who have walked the street and read and compare themselves will be aware of it, depending on who you're talking to.
Senior Advocate, let's piggyback on the question Kayode asked, which I also observed. It appears that we are seeing the result of global discontent across nations. And the president appears to be feeling that given the economic policy that has now placed us where we are. What exactly do you think he was saying without necessarily saying it?
Thank you very much. I think that for the past 1 year, you've seen the general apathy of the people towards governance. And I think the major thing to address when you want to celebrate democracy is the process of how leaders emerge. I'm talking about the electoral process, both in the political parties, how they recruit their leaders in terms of their primaries. We must find a way to ensure that the choice of the people is reflected in the outcome of those processes. Because if you look at June 12, which was organized by the military, option A4, it was a clear election where you would see the way Nigerians were voting across ethnic lines, across religious lines, and it was done by the military. So that's what we use as a yardstick to say if we are marketing democracy, the first area to look at is elections. How do you ensure that it's the real will of the people that will emerge from the process of that recruitment. So if you judge from the period when we started democracy in 1999 up to where we are now, it's been graduating into some proportions of what you say negativity. So people have lost interest because you will clearly see that the process of that electoral organization is not reflecting the will of the people. And like Yar'Adua did, that's President Yar'Adua when he came into office, there was an acknowledgement of some fault in that process that brought him. And he said, I will not retain this. I would like to give Nigerians a different experience from the one that brought me into office. For the president to continue to sit and do as if the electoral process is faultless, that is the first area where I have a challenge. Because for you to really market something, you must get to the line where the fault exists. As long as we continue to pretend that the 2023 elections and the subsequent elections are correct and that they are genuine, we can make progress. We can't get people to have confidence in that system. So I'm expecting that on Democracy Day like this, the president will tell us what he wants to do to the Electoral Act, his suggestions, how we are going to ensure that henceforth nobody will be sworn into office who is not the real will of the people. And that is the first step. Then about economic prosperity.
Yes, I wanted to say something. You say part of the problem, we as a people need to learn this lesson. Part of the problem we have with our democratic system is that it's too just partisan, purely partisan. There are few, if none at all, that thinks of the system of democracy. So, for example, last year, when some of us were saying that let us make sure that electoral processes are done within the window of 90 days before you swear in anybody. If you're going to court, go to court, finish everything so that whoever is declared winner is truly winner. That is a system thing. People called me names, saying I was doing it because I was supporting one person when really I had no dog in the fight. I didn't care about any one of them. The truth of the matter is that if you want a system to be truly democratic, one of the first things you need to ensure that whoever is sworn in is truly accepted by everybody as the winner through facts and through process. A simple process would be, for example, for everybody to be able to say that in my voting poll, in my, what's it called? Polling unit, election was not rigged. Just get every Nigerian to be able to say that. Then second, make sure that what really matters is the local elections, not us waiting 2 a.m. at night for somebody to be using calculator in 2023 to calculate the whole elections of Nigeria.
There's a lot to talk about from the speech. I'm sure it's going to generate lots of commentary as it has in the last few minutes. We must thank you both, gentlemen. Professor Anthony Kila, Director of Commonwealth Institute and Chairman June 12 Movement, as well as Senior Advocate of Nigeria, who joined us from our Abuja studio, Ms. Adegboruwa, joining us from our Abuja studio. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for coming on the program. We really, really do appreciate your perspective. But we're not done with that conversation yet. You know, we've talked to we call them the OGs of democracy, the men who are in the trenches, who were part of the struggle. When we come back, we're going to be talking to the successor generation like us. Well, I know you know what I mean. We'll be back after this break. Join us again.